This is Super Mario Maker Kaizo, a genre of levels made in Super Mario Maker by people obsessed with pushing the game to its absolute limit. A sandbox game from the most popular platforming franchise of all time was always going to see players push the boundary of what was possible. But the SMM community took it so much further than anyone was expecting. Today, we take a look at this community of dedicated players and their hardest creations. Welcome to the history of Mario Maker's hardest levels. To no one's surprise, players started to make hard levels right away. One maker in particular gained a reputation for creating the most ridiculous levels: SMW enthusiast and ROM hack creator, Pangaea Panga. On September 21st, 10 days after the game's release, he would upload the undisputed hardest level so far, Pit of Panga P-Break. If you know anything about Super Mario Maker Kaizo, you've almost definitely seen this level. It was everywhere, and not just in the video game community. It was featured on the Fine Bros React series. There were even mainstream news articles about it. It was also responsible for perhaps the greatest pop-off of all time.
Let's go! Yeah! Yatta!
For its time, this level was absolutely insane, and it no doubt inspired thousands to try and make their own hard levels. One player in particular aimed to make a harder level. You might know his name. I'm referring to Carl Sagan 42. This is Mr. Carl's Wild Ride. Uploaded on the 23rd of October, 2015, this was Carl's attempt to surpass P-Break as the hardest level. This stage takes advantage of the crazy speed you can get from Shelmet's shot out of bullet bill launchers in order to create extremely fast-paced gameplay. For an extra challenge, halfway through the level the player must gain massive height using 3 P-switches to jump off of in mid-air. It's difficult to compare this level to P-Break since they're very different. Only 14 individuals have cleared the level to this day, and while the level never gained nearly as much popularity as P-Break, it still racked up attempts by over 11,500 people. I would argue that Carl succeeded in creating a level harder than P-Break, but Panga probably wasn't bothered by losing his crown, because he was working on something much, much bigger. Only 10 days later, Panga would outdo Carl and himself with Pit of Panga U-Break. This level really turned things up a notch from start to finish. Precise movement to avoid fire bars at the beginning, a juggle section that was well ahead of its time, and finally a short Yoshi section that includes a mid-air slow spit as well as a mid-air shell jump. I distinctly remember when I saw U-Break for the first time, I had no idea what was going on at this final section, so allow me to explain. By jumping off of Yoshi and spitting the shell at the exact same time, you can cause a shell to go slower. Panga figured out that by hitting your head on a ceiling, you could actually land on the shell in mid-air. As for a mid-air shell jump, by facing left, releasing the shell, and turning back to the right during the throw animation, the shell will end up in line with Mario. If the inputs are done at the correct time in Mario's jump, then you can bounce off the shell in mid-air. Mid-air shell jumps are still considered one of the most difficult individual tricks the game had to offer, and you'll be seeing lots of them throughout this video. Like P-Break, this level went viral. In fact, a lot of casual Mario Maker fans might still believe it to be the hardest level ever created. Of course, those filthy casuals are dead wrong. because it would only be 4 days until a new creator would emerge with a contender for hardest level. PTC2 is not a widely recognized level, but in many ways it was well ahead of its time. Created by Romeo, the level keeps an extremely fast pace throughout, using a combination of shells, POWs, and Yoshi. Levels like this would become more and more common in 2016 and onwards, but PTC2 is the oldest level that I've seen do it this well. For whatever reason, this level never got the recognition it deserved, but it's definitely an indication of what kind of levels were in Mario Maker's future. You could argue that PTC2 is not quite as hard as U-Break, but we won't dwell on that debate, since a new Japanese creator was about to arrive on the scene with an even harder level. His name was Val JP. It was only a matter of time before Japan threw their hat in the ring for the hardest level, and on November 17th, 2015, Val exploded onto the scene with an action-packed level like no one had ever seen before. The first section showcases some precise spin jumping as the player maneuvers to land on bombs, as well as spiny shellmets that are flying through the air at high speed. The second section heavily revolves around riding a shellmet shot out of a literal cannon, perhaps inspired by Mr. Carl's Wild Ride. Val is one of the 14 players to have cleared that level. If all of that wasn't enough for you, we still need to talk about the last jump, or in the Kaizo community, what we would call a Nai. U-Break's Nai was tough. Mid-airs are not easy, but it's an absolute walk in the park when compared to the precision required to get into this up-pipe with spikes on either side. Landing on the shell in mid-air was difficult as well, but those spikes would kill many, many runs. As impressive as airspace is, Val was not done pushing the limits of this game, and we'll be hearing plenty more from him as we make our way through Mario Maker history. After airspace, the race to make the hardest level calmed down for a while. There were still plenty of difficult levels, but none really challenged for the title. 2 levels of note during this time period in late 2015 were Time for a Tea Break by Jordan or Say, and Extreme Sadistic Torture World by Chain-Chomp Braden. Both levels represented new making styles that we would see in future ridiculous levels. Tea Break featured tight movement in claustrophobic spaces, while Torture World was a 6+ minute long endurance challenge. Playing at a high level for that long is very difficult to do without making a mistake, so the level earned itself a reputation right away. Keep these creators in mind, because we'll definitely be hearing from Braden and Say again. To get the story of the next level, we have to fast forward a few years. Not because that's when the level was uploaded, but because that's when it was discovered. In 2018, a group of players joined together with a simple but daunting mission: beat every uncleared level from 2015. They had a script that scrubbed the bookmark site for 0% levels and put them into a spreadsheet. One of these levels stood out as particularly confusing. Wall in Front of the Eye was uploaded on Christmas Day 2015, and no one could figure out how to make it in the door with the cape. Eventually, one player by the name of Fritzif found a clear video on Nico Nico, a Japanese video sharing website, and it turned out if you were able to initiate flight with extremely low speed, you could just barely pass through this one-tile column with spikes on either side while maintaining your flight. The one-tile spike flight is what really puts this level into contention for the hardest level. But the rest of the level is not without its challenges. Eventually, Z7 was able to clear the level, and in his clear video description, he states that it is probably the hardest 2015 level. This level is the perfect example of why clear rate is an unreliable indicator of difficulty. Since this level went under the radar for several years, very few people have put attempts on it, so the clear rate looks high at 0.03. But let me assure you, this level is truly ridiculous. Wall in Front of the Eye brings an end to the hardest levels from 2015. Despite the game only launching in September, the community was already making incredibly creative and challenging levels. But it was about to be taken one step further. Jordan kicked off 2016 with a bang. On the 5th of January, he would upload Momentum Mori. This level featured claustrophobic movement like T-Break, but one section in particular stood above the rest. 18 seconds into the level, the player is required to bounce off one shell 6 times using sideways springs and note blocks to reactivate the shell's spinning state. After all of these incredibly precise controlled jumps, the player must spring jump and narrowly avoid a saw while doing so. That saw crushed many dreams. Just look at how close Jordan was to dying on his successful attempt. After the brutal section that came to be known as shell hopping, the player performs a bomb ladder, then spins on a chain jump to avoid fireballs on tracks. Compared to the shell hopping, this final section was easy, but it's still hard enough to kill many runs and therefore make the player perform the shell hopping all over again. Jordan was well aware of this difficulty spike, and in his video description he goes as far as to say that the rest of the level is almost trivial in comparison. At the time it was uploaded, Momentum Mori stood alone as the definitive hardest level in existence. But as you should expect by this point, it didn't take long for a new contender to emerge, this time from Japan. This is L-Break by Saturn. It was uploaded on February 7th, 2016, just over a month after Mori. L-Break has a fair amount of what the maker community calls hidden difficulty. Basically, the level's harder than it looks in the clear video. This can come from some invisible obstacles such as Kaizo blocks, which this level does have, but it mostly refers to tight setups and momentum control. In L-Break, landing on this shell as you're still on your way up from the previous jump is very difficult, as well as grabbing the shellmet on a rail in order to shell jump off the flying P-switch. Normally, it's hard to measure difficulty objectively, but thanks to an experiment done by one of the world's best players, we have some numbers to compare. In 2016, Shun, or Keiichi, set out to see how many times he could clear L-Break and U-Break given the same amount of time. He had already cleared both levels, so none of this time was spent learning. His results are definitive. In 12 hours and 48 minutes, he was able to clear U-Break 14 times and L-Break 0 times. This experiment, while not totally scientific, is an excellent indicator of just how far the player base had come in the 4 short months between the levels. An argument can be made that Mori is harder than L-Break, and difficulty is somewhat subjective, so it's hard to say. However, an even harder level was just around the corner that was once again going to be the definitive hardest level so far. And it came from a familiar face. Val JP. The maker of Airspace was back for more, and he made his return with a bang. Tricky Mario, Val's shell space, exploded in popularity, with Val's video documenting his upload journey having over 1 million views, which for Mario Maker was huge. It took Val a total of 60 hours to clear check. The level starts with some very precise movement to avoid fire bars, a Yoshi slow spin, then follows that up with some controlled jumps. Then we see the level's first mid-air shell jump, followed by throwing 3 spiny shellmets to quickly trigger 3 POWs. Through the door, we reach an iconic spring juggle elevator, and then the player must precisely throw a POW under a shellmet to speed it up and hit a sideways spring. After all of that, the level ends with a second mid-air, this time off a bumper. It would be hard to overstate just how big of an impact this level had on the game. Not only was the level incredibly popular, but it inspired a making style for years and years to come. Not to mention, it was insanely difficult. Before we move on to the next level, we have to talk about the people that had the single greatest influence on Super Mario Maker: Nintendo. On March 9th, 2016, Nintendo released the 1.2 update to the game, which introduced skewers, keys, red coins, and key doors. Red coins would become a staple in Kaizo levels moving forward, since they provided an easy way to force specific movement or tricks, but we're talking about it for another reason. In the editor, you would shake a P-switch and it would turn into a key. What Nintendo probably didn't realize was that somehow this change to P-switches made them significantly harder to jump off of, especially in mid-air. Old levels still had what came to be known as old P-switch physics, but they could not be replicated in the editor anymore. I bring this up because the next level on the list would seek to recreate some of the hardest levels we've seen so far and combine them all into one. I am referring to Renasu Memory Trial. On March 29th, 2016, Renasu would upload a level that combined sections from some familiar creators: Panga, Jordan, and Val, as well as Aqua and Grand Pooh Bear, who we have not mentioned. Since the new P-switch jumps were so hard, Renasu opted to replace them with spring jumps, which were similar inputs and fairly easy. Also worth mentioning is that this level was a mostly faithful recreation of the original levels, with one glaring exception. The shell hopping section from Momentum Mori had the honor of being the only section to receive a nerf. It was just that precise. After enduring this snippet of Mario Maker history, the level ends with an original section by Renasu, and puts a perfect bow on this era of Mario Maker Kaizo. I can't think of a more natural endpoint for part 1 of this video than a level that quite literally recaps the highlights of Kaizo so far. In the next few months, we would see players get much more familiar with the game mechanics and really push the boundaries of creativity as well as difficulty. I can't wait to share these creations with you in part 2. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the coverage so far. The list for parts 2 and 3 is already completed, so hopefully I can get those videos out in a reasonable amount of time. This video has been in the works for over a year now, so if you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a like, and subscribe for parts 2 and 3, because that's where the real magic is going to happen. I'm always down to talk about Mario Maker Kaizo, and you can catch me live on Twitch playing Mario Maker 2 if that's something that interests you. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in part 2.